Ladies and gentlemen, on today's episode, we tackle a ton of different topics here on the show, from budget crankbait rods to dealing with wind in the kayak to how to fish areas with a ton of leaves on the water in the fall and in the winter, replica mounts, fishing electronic brands, Texas rigs versus jigs, and more on today's episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Tackle Talk. Today, we have quite a bit to get to. We have a ton of mailbag questions, we have a really interesting listener poll, and a whole lot more. But first, I at least want to say thank you to all of you listening for all of the positive feedback from the news that broke earlier this week about American legacy fishing. And I'm sure most of you have heard that really quick update episode and the remarks that we played from Brian. It obviously sucks that ALF went out of business, but I am glad that we got to hear it all straight from someone directly involved versus having to kind of go around the rumor mill. And now we have a much better idea of what's actually going on and what's going to happen moving forward, including for those of you out there that might have an outstanding order. Now, American Legacy Fishing, like we said, obviously went out of business, but it sounds like Brian, the previous vice president, is going to step up to the plate and carry the torch by starting his own tackle shop and retroactively honoring all of the orders for those people that might have got caught in the crosshairs of American Legacy Fishing closing and are still waiting for their orders. So some good news on that front, and I'm sure we'll hear more here soon, but the messages that we've got and the feedback was like 99% positive, and it's just cool to see the fishing community kind of all come together and root for the good guys. And Brian and his crew really were the good guys in the tackle space. And it's been kind of cool to sit back and see all of the comments come in of people saying something along the lines of like, hey, you and your team were incredible to work with in the past. We kind of figured something was going on. We could tell based on the website and, things we were hearing around. And when you get everything up and running with this new business, I will be a customer. And that's the good stuff right there. I appreciate everybody's kind words, whether you messaged me or you messaged Brian. I know all of that meant a ton to them, and I'm excited to see what's next for their new business. I don't know much more than you guys do at the moment, but it sounds like the rod locker will be up and running here pretty soon, and we'll get an update from Brian once they have more info. All right, everybody, as you heard in the intro today, it is Mailbag Day here at Tackle Talk. We are embarrassingly behind on a lot of the mailbag entries since we have had 2 guest episodes in the last 3 weeks with Dave Mercer and Bailey Eigbrit, and then our full jerkbait episode 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to try and get through quite a few of these mailbag questions today that you guys have submitted over at tackletalkpodcast.com over the last few weeks. If you don't hear your question or you have one submitted that I haven't answered yet, it never hurts to resubmit, right? I go through every time that we pull questions for mailbags, and I go through probably the last couple months just to pick out some that I think would be good for the show. So you can enter as many times as you want, put your questions in there, resubmit them if we haven't talked about them yet, and maybe you'll hear yourself on an upcoming episode. But let's jump into these today. The first question we have here is from Justin, and he says, hey, Andrew, a friend and I fish out of a bass boat together in the country's armpit, and then in parentheses, he put Southern Illinois. However, most of our solo trips are in pedal drive kayaks on lakes anywhere from 50 to 300 acres. Something I've struggled with in the fall is efficiently fishing out of a kayak on windy days. Any tips for your favorite lures to throw on those windy lake days for maximum efficiency, or just general suggestions? I do use an anchor wizard, as well as always wear a PFD regardless of the weather that day. Thank you, Justin. Well, hey, Justin, thanks for writing in. And man, wind is one of those things that probably frustrates me more than anything else out there on the kayak. More than the rain, more than other boat traffic or pressure or slow fishing days, it's wind. I hate wind in the kayak. It's one of those things that will make me say bad words all day long. I will question my existence. I will get frustrated very, very quickly. And wind is just one of those things that seems to hit that pain point with me where I'm just like, you know what? I don't even want to do this anymore. This is so frustrating. I can't hold my spot. I'm leaving. And I know it's oftentimes, wind is anyway, a good thing for the actual fishing, but once that wind gets over like 15 mile an hour, I would say, or more in terms of a sustained wind, that's when it really gets frustrating in a kayak for me. 5 to 10 is about perfect, but 15 to 20 or over is just one of my biggest annoyances in the world. Like I said, it is infuriating not to be able to hold your spot and stay and fish the direction you want to and hit that cover just like you want to. It's the one time where I'm very jealous of the boat guys and people that have, spot lock or power poles or both. But there are definitely things that you can do and baits that you can reach for to hopefully make those windy days at least a little bit better. So a couple quick tips, I would guess. One, I always face into the wind any chance that I can in the kayak. I would rather face into the wind and cast into the wind and then lose some of my casting distance or have some frustration with the cast itself than cast with the wind, but have the wind at my back and blowing me right into where I'm trying to fish. And you said, I think you're in a pedal kayak. So if you are in a pedal kayak, if you're facing into that wind, it's a little easier just to keep kind of pedaling at a slow pace to hold your spot versus dealing with the wind at your back. So the next thing that I would say is use your bait to guide your kayak a little bit when you can. So if you're using a bait that has a lot of drag or a lot of pull to it, you can actually steer your kayak with your cast by whatever side of the kayak you point your rod tip toward. So if I'm throwing a deep diving crankbait, for instance, and if I reel that in with the rod tip pointed to the right side of my kayak will actually want to turn left a little bit. And then vice versa is also true. If I point my rod tip to the left side of my kayak and then I retrieve that bait that's got a lot of drag or a lot of pull to it, it's going to make my kayak veer to the right a little bit. So I do that a lot when I'm just fishing a big moving bait over a general area and I'm not really casting to a specific target like a stump or a lay down or something like that. Use your bait to guide your kayak a little bit in the direction that you want to go or you want to face. And even a little bit can help there. Now, if you're in 30-mile-an-hour winds, no, it's probably not going to help a whole lot. But on like light breezy days, a chatterbait, a crankbait, a spinnerbait, all of those will at least help you with the direction that you're facing and that light drift that you're probably battling. And then as for the baits themselves on really windy days, I lean toward a lot of flashier baits when the wind is pretty high. So baits with blades, chatterbaits, double willow spinner baits, underspins, something that will just help that bait stand out in the chop. And if it's sunny, I seem to reach for gold blades more. If it's cloudy, I usually start with silver. I don't know if there's any science to that, but that's just been my preference as of late. So there's a few things that might help you. I don't know. I have a very love-hate relationship with the wind, just like it sounds like you might, because too little wind makes the fishing tougher. Too much wind makes the fishing tougher. But if you hit that sweet spot, like I said, in that 5 to 10 mile an hour light and variable wind for a particular day, and it's not enough where it's actually throwing you around and completely frustrating you in the kayak, but it is enough to put a slight chop on the water and stir things up, it can be lights out. So there's not really a great answer to your question. Wind is just going to suck some days if you're in a kayak. That's part of the game. But I hope a couple of those little tips maybe help you ease the frustration, maybe even like 5 or 10%. Okay, the next question is from Duncan, and he says, "Hi, Andrew. I'm loving this great podcast as usual. I was fishing yesterday, and I kept reeling in leaves on my lure. The leaves were on top and bottom of the water, so I switched to a whopper plopper and tried to fish the areas of water without leaves. What do you think works best in leafy conditions? I was thinking weedless lures, but I don't know. P.S. I hope your hard drive gets fixed. Thanks, Duncan." Appreciate it, Duncan. Yeah, we are still waiting on the answer on the hard drive. They've tried 2 things and it has not fixed it yet. So we're definitely trying to get it back, but we've got up and running and we're sort of limping along with the Tackle Talk without it. So, worst case scenario, if it doesn't get recovered, I think we'll be all right. But definitely a little bit of a frustration and a road bump that I didn't see coming. But appreciate the kind words. And yeah, as far as your question goes, this is another one of those sort of mortal enemies of fall fishing are leaves. Because you're going to have leaves on top of the water. You're going to have leaves at the bottom of the water. You're going to have leaves in the middle of that water column too, just floating around. It's not quite as bad as like cottonwood in the summer because at least leaves don't get caught in your line when it goes back on your spool and causing all of those issues that cottonwood does. But leaves definitely make things more interesting and a little tougher in the fall too. Now, the leaves themselves, I think, depend a little bit on if you're fishing a like still water situation like a lake or a pond or moving water like a river or a creek. Because in the fall and early winter in the creeks especially, leaves can be a great indicator of how that water is flowing throughout that creek or river system. You can actually tell how the water is moving by where the leaves are. So if you see a big riffle with fast water and then all of a sudden to one side there's a big area of leaves on top of the water, you know that that's that slow circulating eddy just off to the side of that main river current. And as the water temperatures cool down, those bass love sitting in those calm eddies right off of main current. Now, the problem is, so do carp and catfish and all kinds of other trash fish. So if you see that, it could either be a killer smallmouth spot or 10,000 carp and channel cats. You just kind of have to figure that out on your own. But then on the pond side of things, or the lake side, I guess, too, those leaves often show you which way the wind was blowing most recently because that's where the leaves are going to be. So if you had a wind that was blowing east to west, a lot of the leaves are going to be on the west side of the lake. That makes sense. So you can see, even if it's not super windy or it's pretty calm that day, you can see what way the wind was blowing most recently, and then that can give you a good idea of where to start on that lake. The other thing to remember is just the biology of the situation, which is that leaves carry like bugs and microorganisms and all that kind of stuff, which then attract bait fish, which then attract predator fish. So they can kind of jumpstart that food chain a little bit. They can also provide temporary cover, which probably shouldn't be overlooked either. So the next question should be, well, how do you fish them? And I would say, like, if there are leaves on top of the water, it sounds silly, but you can always punch them just like you would regular weeds the rest of the time of year. That's worked for me before. You can also just cast to an open spot with a subsurface bait and then keep your rod tip down and your line down almost underwater so that you can go under those leaves at the top of the water and you can clear them and you don't have to worry about it. If there are leaves on the bottom, then I would say your best bet is to go with like single hook baits or weedless baits, which means you do have to put down like the crankbaits and things that are going to go super deep with trebles and actually pick up a lot of those weeds. And then in the middle of the water column, kind of same thing. You should probably go with more single hook baits and a little less like jerk bait or something like that, because you're going to run into those leaves in the middle of the water column if you're pulling a jerk bait with 9 hook points through it. So sometimes you have to pick up something else, like I said, that has more of a single hook presentation. That's a spinner bait, a chatter bait, weedless like a Texas rig, jig, single swimmer, things like that, just to try and avoid the weeds the best you can and still fish that water effectively. All right, the next question here is from Kevin, who says, "Hey, Andrew, you answered my question on forward-facing sonar a few weeks back on the podcast and whether I should get it or not for my kayak tournament fishing. Based on your advice, I've decided to add it to my arsenal. I'm a research junkie, so I've been looking around at all of the options, and one that's really piqued my interest, mainly because of the price, is the Lowrance Eagle Eye 9. I know the biggest setback is that the unit is limited in its range and visual area because of it only having just one beam. The sonar snobs are going to tell me to just get a Garmin or Active Target, but is it really worth 3 times the cost for someone that just wants to dip their toe into this technology? I don't think I'll be one to venture out into the middle of the lake in 80 foot of water to scope suspended fish. I plan on using it for the shallow areas that I typically fish now, to scan around for structure and look for fish so that I can quickly eliminate dead areas. Thank you once again for your advice, Kevin." So yeah, Kevin, I do remember this question from probably a month or 2 ago. At this point where you were asking about, hey, everybody else has forward facing. I want to compete in these tournaments. Should I add it? And I think my answer back then was like, I did that, but I added it with the ability to take it off my kayak and leave it at home for all those days that I don't need it. So I'm not tempted to use it while I'm out and then messing up my regular fishing. So now it sounds like you're looking for which one do you buy? And obviously because of the price, that Lowrance Eagle Eye 9 is very appealing, but I would say that it's not for everybody. Now, with that being said, I'm glad that you provided some context to this, because for what you want to do, which you said is like scanning around for structure and to try and find at least where fish are so you can eliminate those dead areas and find areas that are at least worth fishing a little bit more, then yeah, I think that Lowrance Eagle Eye 9 will do just fine. But if you're really trying to like hardcore scope the deeper water offshore with like small mid-strolling baits or something like that, I would say it's probably not the best fit. And not only just because of the lower tech, like you said, obviously it has less beams than a normal forward-facing sonar transducer, so you have some scaling back there, but also just because of the screen size. So it comes with a 9-inch screen, which is not ideal, I would say, for forward-facing sonar, and take that from someone who does use it on a 9-inch screen currently. I use a 93 SV from Garmin currently, and I would say that I really wish a lot of times that I had a bigger screen. I would kill for like a 10 or a 12-inch screen so that I would have better resolution and you can see that target separation a lot better. You can see tiny baits a lot easier. Screen size and resolution matter an awful lot, not just the transducer that you're using. But for what you want to do, I would say I would have no problem with the Lowrance Eagle Eye 9. For $999, you get the graph and the transducer. It's like impossible to beat. I have a 93 SV, which is a 9-inch Garmin screen, and the LVS 34 and GLS 10, which you need to run LiveScope. And that setup, you're in it for like $2,300, $2,400, like you said. So for a third of the cost, I think it's an extremely serviceable option, specifically for what you said you want to do with it. All right, the next question here is from Tom Kennedy. And he says, hey man, love the podcast. Just a heads up, there's a guy on YouTube jumping on your name, Tackle Talk Tuesday. Hey, Tom, thanks for writing in. I appreciate it. Thanks for keeping your eye out and trying to help protect us here at Tackle Talk. Yeah, there's been quite a few people over the years that have used like the Tackle Talk name or mantra there a little bit. Like I know there was, I think still is, a podcast called Tackle Talk Live. I think they're down in like Texas somewhere. They've been doing it for like 3 or 4 years at least. And it's caused quite a bit of confusion sometimes when people think they're listening to this show, but they accidentally click and listen to that show. And they're like, what the heck? This is like a weird local Southern thing down here. This is not what my buddies told me to try and listen to. And it does cause some headaches from time to time. But I've just sort of taken the approach of like, look, I don't want to be a jerk to anybody as long as it's not causing too big of an issue and they're not doing it on purpose or maliciously or trying to copy us like verbatim, then I really just try and let people do their thing and not like jump in and be, hey, I had this name a couple years ago. You need to stop. You need to take it down right now. I'm not trying to be that guy. Now, I have had to do that one time. There was somebody about 2 years ago, a very, very well-known tackle website started a podcast called the Tackle Talk Podcast, and I had to jump on that one really quickly and be like, hey, this one's not going to fly. But for all of those other ones that just want to do like a Tackle Talk Tuesday or Friday night Tackle Talk Live or whatever they want to call it, I'm not going to cause a big stink over those. I really try my best to be positive and supportive of people. And like I said, I'm sure most of it is not malicious on their part, even if it is a little frustrating sometimes and causes some confusion for us here at Tackle Talk. I try and let most of that slide unless it is egregious. All right, the next question here is from Brady, who says, hey, Andrew, I've been listening to some of the older podcasts, and I've listened to almost every episode now. I know one of the episodes you briefly talked about a guy who caught a record smallmouth, and he kept it alive during the measuring process. My question is, if I or someone else I know catches a smallmouth that was mountable or a possible record status, what tips would you have in order for us to keep the fish alive during the measuring process? Also, what measurements do I need to get a replica mount made? Thanks so much. Love listening to the podcast, Brady. Well, thanks, man. Thanks for writing in. Let's start with like the measurement process itself and if you want to keep it alive. If you want to keep it alive, it's pretty much your standard fish care. It is, in the live well with good, stable water temps, plenty of oxygen, keep that fish right side up, your normal stuff. If you don't have that, then, it's in the net right side up, it's on a donkey leash, something like that to keep it in the water, obviously, and as fresh a water as you can. Now, the interesting thing is a couple months ago when we had one of the researchers on, they actually said one of the most accurate ways to get a measurement for a possible state record fish is by actually killing that fish and keeping it on ice, because that prevents that fish from losing weight due to stress after it's being handled and it's in the box forever and all that kind of stuff. But it definitely depends, I think, on your morals or what you want to do with that fish. It's your fish. You caught it. You can do what you want with it as long as it's legally able to be kept. You could want to keep that fish alive, which I probably am right there with you. I would want to do that as well. I'd rather lose an ounce or two on that fish and keep it alive than kill it to get it weighed and preserve what weight it would have lost from the stress, but that's just me. But I guess the circumstance matters a little bit too. Is that fish only 1 ounce above the state record when you caught it? Well, then that stress weight does make a difference, and maybe you do want to kill that fish and put it on ice. I don't know. That's a question for everybody to ask themselves at that time. I am not going to judge anybody. I think when you catch a fish that big and it could be that important, I am never going to judge somebody for keeping that fish, for killing that fish, for doing whatever, for getting a skin mount made. I've done that before. I have a skin mount on the back wall behind me. I'm not going to judge anybody for doing that ever, especially when there are ramifications of a possible record fish. Because the reality is that fish is probably pretty darn old and it's on its last leg probably. It's not going to reproduce much more, if at all. And then it could possibly be immortalized versus going on to live another couple months and then become turtle food anyway. So I'm just playing devil's advocate there. Killing that fish is not always like the most sacrilegious thing in the world. I could definitely see situations where people would want to do that and want to get that fish accurately weighed. But like I said, right now, if you ask me, I would probably be in the camp of wanting to see that fish stay alive too, especially if you just want a mount and it's not like a state record implication at all, and you're just saying, hey, this is like my personal best. I want to get this fish mounted in some way. You don't have to kill that fish by any means to get that done. Replica mounts are so much nicer than skin mounts nowadays. There are some insane replica mount artists out there. Our good buddy and past guest here on Tackle Talk, Blake Paff of Dark Corner Custom Fish Replicas and Dark Corner Custom Crankbaits. He's a great example of that. Like I said, I have 2 fish on the back wall behind me right now. One of them is a skin mount of an almost 7-pound largemouth, and one is a replica mount of the first 5-pound smallmouth I ever caught out of the river. And that replica mount kicks the snot out of my skin mount, like no questions asked. Blake did an incredible job with it. It looks so good compared to the real fish that I have right beside it. It's kind of embarrassing. So replicas, at least in my opinion, are the way to go nowadays. Now, for a good replica, all you really need is like a good picture of that fish, and the more pictures, the better, so you can capture that detail. I always say, get a picture of both sides of that fish. That's something that a lot of people don't think of, because you never know what direction that mount will be facing when you decide with the replica mount artist on what you want to do with it, what molds are available, all of that. Get a good picture of both sides of the fish. Also, you need an accurate length measurement, a weight on that fish, and then if you can, get a girth measurement on that fish as well in terms of inches around. So the girth is a little bit harder to measure sometimes. What I always do is just take a piece of fishing line, wrap it around the fat belly part of that fish, and then cut it to the right length, and then you can measure that piece of line a little bit later, either immediately and then write it in your phone, or take that piece of line home, measure it when you get home if you don't have something to measure it with right there. But that's basically what you need. You need a length, a girth, a weight, and a picture of each side of that fish, and you'll be in great shape to get an awesome replica mount made. All right, the next question here is from Asher, and he says, hey, Andrew, my name is Asher. I'm 13 years old, and I've been listening to your podcast since day one, and I just wanted to say thank you. Now, on to my question. In what circumstances would you use a jig over a Texas rig or vice versa? Thanks for taking the time to read my question. Well, hello, Asher. Thanks for writing in. Good question. I would say I don't really have a true black and white answer for when I pick up a Texas rig or a jig, but I think a lot of it has to do with what type of cover that I'm around. That's usually where I start. So if I'm primarily fishing weeds, I actually like a Texas rig more than a jig. And I know there's a lot of people that will say, nope, you want to go swim jig. I hear you, but I prefer a heavier Texas rig around a lot of weeds than I do any sort of other jig. But if I'm fishing rock, it's jig all day long. And if it's primarily wood that I'm fishing and I'm flipping, laydowns or brush piles or something, then I'll bounce back and forth for sure. It has a lot to do with fall rate for me at that point, but I'm probably picking up a jig for wood a little bit more than I do a Texas rig a lot of times. So rock is jig all day. Weeds are Texas rigs for me, and then wood is a little bit of a toss-up, but probably jig most of the time. And then other than that, I'd say depth probably plays a pretty big role in what I'm going to pick, Texas rig or jig. It just depends on how heavy of weight I actually want to be throwing. Like if I'm in, 10 or 15 foot or deeper, I'm probably picking up a heavy jig because I'm not really going to throw half ounce or heavier Texas rigs a lot of the time, but I will throw half ounce or 1 ounce jigs all the time. So depth, cover, I'd say those are probably my 2 decision points in terms of which one I reach for first, Texas rig or jig. All right, next question here is from Scott, who says, hey, Andrew, first of all, I've been listening to the show for about a year now, and I just want to say thanks for everything. Listening to your show has really taught me a lot, and in turn gives me an opportunity to show my kids and my friends what I've learned so they're learning too. I spend my hour commute to and from work listening to old episodes now, except on Tuesday mornings, and it's great. My question is pretty simple on this one. I'm looking for a decent spinning rod, and throughout my time listening, I've continually heard you praise Dobyns rods. Recently, I came across them on Amazon for what looked like a ridiculously good price to me. Specifically, I'm looking at the Dobyns MK702SF and the MK703SF rods, which are both listed on Amazon right now for like $55. Looking at other websites online, they're still listed at like $99 to $119. I guess I'm questioning if these are maybe priced wrong and it's a gnarly deal, or maybe I'm just not seeing something on Amazon and it's going to be a you get what you pay for situation. If you get a chance, maybe scope them out and please let me know. Once again, thanks for everything and please keep it up, Scott. Hey, Scott, thanks for the kind words. I do appreciate it. That's awesome. And I probably have two answers here for you. One, yes, on Amazon, those prices that you see on Dobyns rods do fluctuate quite a bit, but they've always been real. So it's not like a pricing issue. It's not a scam. Those are real Dobyns rods that you're going to get shipped from Amazon. Just make sure when you're ordering that, like under the title there, it says something like, it's from Dobyns rods, or it'll say, I think it usually says, click to visit the Dobyns rods store. Those are rods that are sold and shipped directly from GSM, who owns Dobyns, so they are legit. You don't have anything to worry about on that front, at least. Now, as for the Maverick itself, the rod that you're talking about, it's not my favorite rod in the Dobyns lineup for sure, but that probably makes sense because it's probably the cheapest rod in the Dobyns lineup, except for a Colt. And at the price you're talking about, it's even less than a Colt. So as far as value goes, would I buy it at the list price of $99 or $119? No, I wouldn't. But would I buy it for $55? Yeah, I would definitely buy those rods for $55. You can't buy hardly anything anymore for $55 for a serviceable rod. So that is an above average $55 rod, and I would say a below average $119 rod, if that makes sense. So for me, Dobyns starts at the Fury line. That's where every bit of praise you've heard me give Dobyns over the years, that's where it starts. It starts at the Fury. But with recent price increases, unfortunately, a Fury is now like $150. They used to be $119 to $129. Those days are gone. Now it's a $150 rod, like at minimum a lot of times. So that is a far cry from the $55 that you're going to pay for that Maverick that you're seeing online. I mean, that's almost like 3 times as much. So keep that in mind as well. It all depends on your budget. If your budget is $50, that is a killer rod. If your budget is $119 and up, then I think there are better options out there. We did an episode probably 4 or 5 months ago at this point, the $100 or $99 rod shootout, whatever I called it. Go back and listen to that because the Maverick was in that comparison along with like 5 or 6 other models that are right there at that $100 price point. And that would probably be worth listening to. There were some really good rods in there for that $100, $109 now with all the price increases. The Fenwick Eagle, the Daiwa Tatula XT. There were some really nice rods that you should probably look at if you are in that price range. If you're not and your price range is $50, go ahead and grab that rod because I don't think you'll find a better rod for $55 right now. All right, next question here is from Cooper, who says, hey, Andrew, love the show, and even though I'm up here in Canada, I found your tips very helpful. I'm a 15-year-old angler from Ontario, and I have a question that's been nagging me for some time now. 2 words, deep cranking. I cannot seem to find success deep cranking and just wondered if you had any tips or favorite baits. Also, do you have any crankbait specific rod recommendations? Length, power, action for a good all-around cranking stick. Up here, I don't have Dobyns, so the 735 CB glass is not an option, unfortunately. But if you had any specific models, my budget would be right around $200 USD, which is about $280 Canadian. I fish out of my 12-foot aluminum boat on mostly small to medium lakes and rivers if that helps. And I just gotta say it, blade baits are underrated, Corrado Ks are the best, casting reel drags should be locked down, and snaps all day. Keep up the good work, Cooper. Well, first off, I mean, we can't ignore that last sentence there. Attaboy. Blade baits, Corrado Ks, locking down your drag on a casting reel, using snaps. I can tell that somebody listens to Tackle Talk and I have infected you a little bit on that one. We have now officially indoctrinated the youth of Canada. That is awesome. But no, I appreciate you listening. I still stand by all of that. Maybe not all of them together. I probably wouldn't throw a blade bait with a Corrado K on a lockdown casting rod with a snap on it. But, you know, all of those in their own situations, yes, are definitely things that I love. That's funny. Okay, let's go to your question here. And yeah, dude, I love deep cranking. It's like the 4x4 off-roading of bass fishing. It's baits that dig deep. They bang and crash off the bottom. A lot of resistance from that bait. Low, slow gear ratio reels for torque. Just a lot of force and power and strength in that technique of deep cranking. So some general tips, I would say, unlike jerk baits we talked about a few weeks ago, where you want a bait that dives to a depth just a few feet above the bottom, with a deep crank, I want that bait to get all the way down to the bottom and then some, and quick. So if I'm fishing like 8 foot of water, I'm probably grabbing a deep diving crankbait that dives 10 foot plus. I would rather have a bait that dives a little too deep just to be safe, to make sure that I'm maintaining that bottom contact. That's always been the way that I go with deep cranking and actually choosing my crankbait. Now, I also always run snaps on all of my deep cranks so that I can swap out colors and diving depths really easy on the fly. I switch baits a ton when I'm deep cranking, because even two baits that dive the same depth and hit the bottom, they're going to deflect different depending on what bait you're throwing. So like a Rapala DT deflects off rocks differently than a Strike King XD does, or a Spro Rock Crawler, or a Berkeley Dredger. So for instance, a Strike King XD is a little bit more aggressive than a Rapala DT. A DT has a little bit more finessier bounce off of rock than an XD or a Rock Crawler. So they all have their nuances for sure, and that's why I'm often switching back and forth to figure out what's working on that particular day. But half the fun of deep cranking is that it can be a pretty simple technique technically, but it's a tough technique physically. Technically and mentally, it's basically just about covering water and maintaining bottom contact. Now, yes, there will be certain areas like points and drop-offs and stuff where the angle of your cast will matter, that's for sure. But just in general terms, I want to be dredging that bottom, and I want to make big, long casts so that I get as much time with that bait down on the bottom as possible, and I'm covering as much water as I can. That's pretty much the gist of deep cranking. But physically, it's a lot of resistance from that bait. It's tougher to reel, and over hours and hours, that's going to wear on your wrists and your arms and everything. But man, when you get that bait and it's just digging, and it's just powering through that rock or whatever you're bumping it off of, and then all of a sudden it stops and it loads up with a fish, it is a rush unlike a lot of other techniques that are out there. So for your rod choice, I would say, yes, I do love my Dobyns 735 and 736, both those CB glass models, but you said that you can't get those up there in Canada, so I don't know what you can and can't get, so I'm just going to go with something that hopefully is so universal that you can get your hands on. Let's take something that I think is a pretty underrated cranking rod, and that's going to be the Bass Pro Shops cranking stick. A lot of people are going to look at me sideways for that. That is a really solid rod for $99 US. So whatever that is for you, like 140 Canadian probably. They have heavier models and lighter models. So they have a heavier model for deep cranking. That's like the 7.3 heavy is a good option. If you want something a little bit more versatile or can throw lighter lures too, you can go with like the 7.6 medium heavy or the 7-foot medium heavy. Both those are great options. But you could actually buy two of those. You could get a heavier model and a medium heavy, and you have a crankbait rod now for, shallower, lighter stuff and for big, deep stuff as well for the same price that you were going to pay for one rod. So I don't know what your availability is up there in Canada. I would hope that Bass Pro is universal enough that you can get that shipped to Canada, but that would be something that would at least be worth looking into, would be the Bass Pro Shops cranking sticks. I used one for like 2 or 3 years, and I don't really have anything bad to say about it, especially for the price. It's killer, where you could get 2 rods instead of 1, and you can build out that arsenal for regular cranks and deep cranks. All right, and our last one here today is from Henry, who says, "Hi, Mr. Hayes. My name is Henry, and I'm 14 years old. I live in Northwest Indiana, where bass fishing isn't as good as I wish it was, though I still try my best to learn from techniques to try and catch what fish there are. I mostly fish ponds where bluegill are the main type bait fish. I was wondering what color patterns you like most for imitating bluegill, and what are some of your favorite pond baits? Thanks for your time. Keep up the great work, Henry." First off, Henry, you can call me Andrew. My name is Andrew. You don't have to call me Mr. Hayes. You made me feel super old right there with the Mr. Hayes to start out. So you don't have to do that. If you ever write in again, Andrew is just fine, but appreciate it. Thanks for writing in. Okay, as far as color patterns for imitating pond bluegill, I would say my first thing that I would do is to go catch some of those bluegill and take pictures of them. And I'm serious. I do this a lot because the bluegill differ from pond to pond. Different ponds have different looks and different colors to their bluegill. There's a big pond slash probably small lake, I would call it. I don't know what you would actually classify it as, but around me here in Dayton, where probably 70% of the bluegills that I've caught out of that giant pond have this like weird purplish tint to them. And it's a very distinct purple hue. It is not a fluke. It's not just a couple of them. A lot of the bluegills in that pond or that small lake, whatever you want to call it, have this weird purple look to them. And then I have other lakes and other ponds around here where the bluegill have a lot more pronounced dark bars on the side of them, or lakes where they're just kind of pale and sickly looking. So it all depends on what the gills in that pond look like. But overall, color and bait choice, I would say I would definitely go with something like a chatterbait. You can't go wrong in ponds in general. Chatterbaits kill. And my favorite color for imitating bluegill is called green pumpkin purple. And that has nothing to do with the purple bluegill I was just talking about earlier. When you look up that pattern, it does a great job of imitating a regular bluegill. It's got the bars on the side. It's got kind of that, bluegilly green pumpkin sort of, muted dark green look to it. That kind of leads us into the next thing, which is I would also look at perch patterns. And honestly, I think that goes for a lot of different baits, not just chatterbaits. Patterns that are labeled perch also do a really good job of looking like a bluegill underwater sometimes too. So I would lean into those type of things. I would lean into green pumpkin colors versus your bright whites or shad patterns. I would go with something that maybe has a little black, a little orange in it. Like those two-tone baits where it's darker on the top, lighter on the bottom. A lot of bluegills look like that, where the top of them is almost this green pumpkin color, and then it fades to more of like a cream belly. They might have some orange accents on their belly, and then dark bars on the side. So any combination of any of that kind of stuff, which is why perch patterns work really well. Almost anything green pumpkin will do a pretty good job of imitating your normal bluegills. That's probably the route that I would go in terms of color patterns. All right, and finally here, before we end today, I want to jump into a really quick listener poll. We haven't done one of these in a few weeks. We are overdue. These are really fun where we get to ask you, the Tackle Talk listeners, a question and see where you guys land on the issue, and then I get to talk about where I land, and we see if we agree or we disagree. And today, we're going to talk about a very simple question that I posed on our social media last week for you all to answer, and it was quite simply, who is your favorite fishing electronics company amongst the three-headed monster of Lowrance, Humminbird, and Garmin? And this question was for electronics across the board. This is 2D, down, side imaging, live sonar. It's pretty open-ended, but I was curious where everybody landed in terms of their preference of the actual brand of their electronics. And of course, I'll give you my 2 cents here really fast, but for the record, before I do that, I want it on record here that I think this is going to be a 2-horse race between Garmin and Humminbird. If I had to guess, I'm going to say Garmin is probably going to be number 1 for you all. Number 2 is probably going to be Humminbird, and I would say probably a close second with Humminbird, and then I would say Lowrance is probably a distant third, but I could be wrong. Now, as far as my answer goes, I'm going to say across the board, who gets my vote as of right now, November 25th, 2025, I'm actually going to go with Humminbird. I've owned multiple Humminbirds, multiple Garmin units. I have to admit, I've never owned a Lowrance, so my experience there is going to be pretty limited compared to Humminbird and Garmin. But of those two, I've had a better experience overall with my Humminbird units. Right now, on my rig that I run in the rivers and my kayak setup, I'm running Garmin, and I got to be honest, I think I'm going to make the switch back to Humminbird with my next units, and I hopefully will do that pretty soon, because as nice as Garmin's technology is, and I do think they're leading the game in terms of, forward-facing sonar, live scope is tough to beat. The LVS 34 is the industry standard right now, even though I think Mega Live 2 is definitely better than Mega Live 1, and it's very usable, and I think it's getting up there for sure, and competing with Garmin pretty nice. And I guess that Mega Live 2, you don't have to have a black box, which is a big plus for us in the kayak world. But my big differentiator right now is going to be dependability, because I'll be honest, I have had more issues with my current Garmin setup than I ever would have imagined, and it's pretty frustrating at this point. Now, I will say I've had pretty good customer service up to now through Garmin, but this last time it's not covered under warranty anymore. I was going to have to pay hundreds of dollars to have this thing replaced or fixed, and at this point that I've only had it for like, I don't know, a year and a half, I feel like, maybe 2 years. It's pretty frustrating that I have had it break as many times as I have. I mean, I have had my GT54 transducer, the one that's on the bottom of my kayak, I have had 2 go bad on me in the last 18 months. 2 separate transducers both had the same issue where my side imaging just completely went out on me on one side of it. And then slowly now on the second one, the left side has also gone out too. So my right side went out first, left side went out now. There's nothing I can do on side imaging now. And it is extremely frustrating because the way that I have my kayak set up, to actually go through and change that transducer, I'm going to have to cut out and completely replace the mounting system that I made for that transducer. I specifically made one that could retract and go down and go up so that way it's protected from rocks and, banging on things and things like that. So I have it permanently installed basically. So I have to go through with the Sawzall and actually cut this out if I want to replace the transducer. It is a huge headache. So 2 transducers in 18 months that have gone bad. If I replace it, this will be my third, and having to rewire and replace everything, just not something that is super convenient. And I have been pretty upset with my Garmin system here pretty recently. So that's just probably more recent frustration to me, and I'm sure that's bleeding over into this a little bit, but I keep it very honest with you here on Tackle Talk, and that is the issue that I'm running to at the moment. Also, I should probably say, with my actual live scope setup, which I don't use that often, but when I do bring it with me, I have to reset that darn unit probably 20 to 25 times per day to fix issues with my live scope. Either it's getting that dreaded sort of death sway back and forth where it looks like you're on, 18-foot rollers and you can't read anything on the graph because it's swaying back and forth. It does that sometimes. A lot of times the auto depth goes haywire and starts switching back and forth from 5 feet to 100 feet back and forth really fast and glitching out so you can't do anything. And I constantly have to get up there and reset everything, turn it off, power it back on, wait for it to reboot. And like I said, 20 to 25 times a day. It is like probably every 10 to 12 minutes, it seems like I have to reset this thing, and it's so annoying. So that's a lot of the issues that I have had currently with my Garmin. And like I said, I never had any of these issues with Humminbird. And then pair that with the fact that the new Explorer units from Humminbird look pretty darn cool. They fixed a lot of the issues that people had with the old Humminbird units. And I think if you ask me right now, I'm probably going to be switching back to Humminbird and hopping on that train here in the near future. So that's my pick. I loved my Humminbird Mega side imaging. I think it was clearer and better than my current Garmin side imaging is. And that's obviously, while it was still working, that comparison is valid, which is probably what I use 90% of the time. I'm a side imaging guy. Down and 2D are both fine on both. I don't really see a huge difference in either of those, but side imaging is my number one priority, and I actually really liked my old Humminbird Helix SI better than I do my Garmin 93 SV with a GT54 right now. So that's my pick. I'm going to go Humminbird 1, Garmin number 2, Lowrance number 3. But let's see what you guys said. Let's open this up here. Like I said, I never look at these results before we talk about it. So now I'm going to open these up for the first time, and oh no, this is this is a bloodbath. 63% of you said Garmin. Almost 2/3 of everyone that responded to this picked Garmin as their top choice. I mean, I would have probably guessed like 40% Garmin, 30% Humminbird, 30% Lowrance, 40, 30, 30, something like that. But it's not even close. We had 63% pick Garmin, 22% of you picked Humminbird, and 15% picked Lowrance. So 63 for Garmin, 22 for Humminbird, 15% Lowrance. That is not even close. Now, I said before we started, I thought that was going to be the order you guys were going to land, but I had no idea that was going to be as big of a landslide as it was. 63% out of your 3 choices for Garmin. So there you go, I guess. A clear number 1 among Tackle Talk listeners right now. Garmin, Humminbird number 2, Lowrance number 3. All right, everybody, that is today's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening to Tackle Talk. I appreciate each and every one of you that takes the time to listen every week. As always, if you want to keep up with us, we're on tackletalkpodcast.com. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Tackle Talk Podcast. And we'll see you guys right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2019. For more, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.